Jesse Allen here, being joined now by our friend Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien to talk weather. Eric, great to have you back on Market Talk. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's glad to be back.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us here today as we flip the calendar to the month of August, and we still have plenty to talk about when it comes to weather. And, we're still watching that story that has been all year long. It's the Eastern Belt wet, the Western Belt hot and dry. And, we're getting into that critical soybean time now for pod set and wondering if we're going to get moisture. And I think just to start, a lot of folks have been centering on maybe some rain potential here for parts of Iowa, Wisconsin this weekend. What are you seeing with the latest model runs and where we're at with that rain potential coming up?
Yeah, that's been the trick. It's what's the latest model runs say, because this particular setup is coming from two very subtle features in the flow of the jet stream. And we like them when they're just big and obvious and they sweep through and do their thing. But these are very small, what we call short waves in the flow of the atmosphere. And one's going to come out of Northern California late today, tomorrow, and it's going to go straight towards South Dakota. But it's all about the timing and where it pulls the moisture from. And what we're going to see from this particular system is that it's going to be timed best with storms later once it gets farther to the east. And so if I had to kind of peg an area that's got the best chance of getting some storms, it's going to be mostly the eastern 2/3 of Iowa, most of the eastern 2/3 of Minnesota, and then the western 2/3 of Wisconsin. We call that the upper Mississippi watershed, right? That's exactly where that area is. So the problem is that the timing of that wave is going to leave most of the Dakotas out of getting the most meaningful rainfall. And you know as well as I do that that's where the greatest soil moisture deficits are. And the heat already came back to that area this week, whereas a lot of the rest of Corn Belt's been seeing these highs in the low 80s. And really, even though it's been dry, not seen any problems because of that. In fact, shoot, the last several days here in Illinois, we've had big dews every morning. So it's not raining, but we're getting the moisture out of the atmosphere from other mechanisms. So yeah, that's been the problem is trying to get the timing of that next system right as it comes into the upper Midwest and into the northern plains. And the latest runs just kind of keep it centered right over the Mississippi River and just go about 250 miles on either side of it. And that's where we're going to be looking at the heaviest rains.
Well, and you talked about the Dakotas, and obviously they're in trouble up there. And I pulled the latest drought monitor. I'll pull it up on the screen for us. But, we look at this drought monitor, Eric, and I mean, the colors really haven't changed a whole lot as we've gone through the year. Maybe we've gotten a little bit of a darker shade of red up there across the northern plains. But overall, this has kind of been the same story we've had all year long.
It has. And, when we think about seasonal prediction, what we've learned about it is that there are really only two weather variables that can be used to predict an upcoming season. I'm talking like months in advance. And it's ocean temperatures, which we've talked a lot about, and also soil moisture. Those are the only two things that show some sort of statistical relationship here. So when we went into the season with the drought in places like that, it's very, very difficult to correct it. And we saw that this year.
Well, let's talk about some of the other things out there on the weather front here. And I know the tropics, some of the tropical systems, we always wonder how that plays into what we're seeing in the continental U.S. Talk about what you're seeing in the tropics right now, Eric.
Yeah, I'm actually watching four different areas in the tropics. We might as well start in the Atlantic. Finally, after a relatively boring July, which is good, but a boring July in the tropics where we only had one system, Elsa, at the very beginning of July, things are starting to pick back up again. The National Hurricane Center is watching a couple different areas. And long story short, best evidence would suggest that both of those storms, we call them fish storms, they're going to stay out in the open Atlantic. But what it signals here is that the tropical Atlantic is ramping up as it normally does at this point in August anyway. So we're heading over the next, it's about 35 days from now, we'll reach the peak of the hurricane season. So we expect a lot of activity between now and then. Now, place number two, East Pacific, lots and lots of tropical activity there. I'm talking about just off the west coast of Mexico. Those storms keep moving toward Hawaii, though, and they're not yet curling around and coming back like they can into the southwest United States. So those are really kind of staying out there away from us. Third area, let's skip all the way over to the Western Pacific. Hottest ocean temperatures I've ever seen off of China and Japan. Some places they're over 10 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the climatological average. Now, here's the problem with that. If we keep building tropical systems there, and we're watching several in that region right now, the typhoon area, they tend to move north. And as they move north, they can sometimes get up into like the Bering Sea, the North Pacific, and completely disrupt the jet stream farther downstream where we are here in the United States. So that's a big wild card. Like if I can't see where they're going to go and what they're going to do more than a few days out, how could I predict what's going to happen in the months to come? And then the big spot, it's right there in the Central Pacific, where we've now seen some cooler water emerge on some stronger trade winds. We call that La Nina, and the Southern Oscillation Index. It's just an index value we use like we use index values in the stock market all the time, right? It's very positive, which indicates that we've changed that pressure pattern toward a more La Nina-like pattern. So long story short, the ocean temperatures are quite warm everywhere, except for right there in the Central Pacific where that La Nina is going on. And what it tends to do to us in fall is give us a drier fall. But none of the models are saying that right now. They're all just overly wet and just putting rain down everywhere. And what I have to say right now is I would look at them and say, I don't think this is going to be the case. At best, we're looking at scattered storms, not widespread rain for everybody going through the month of August.
Now, you talk about the tropics, and part of me wonders, just with the current jet stream setup, what if we do see a hurricane make its way into, say, the Gulf of Mexico here this month? And we know that moisture can sometimes get pulled up the Mississippi and get pulled into the Midwest. If we see something like that with the current jet stream setup, is it possible with the way the jet stream's set up right now?
Yeah, very much so. The jet stream, by the time we get to about this point next week, is going to be north of the U.S.-Canada border. And if it's up there, it's not going to affect anything go on with those tropical storms. So they'll come up, sometimes come up the gut of the Mississippi and dump a bunch of rain. But here's the thing. Historically, you look at those paths, who would get the rain? Well, I could draw you a line. It's basically from Louisiana through Arkansas, Missouri, through Illinois, and east. Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley. We don't typically get that moisture all the way to Iowa, certainly not to Nebraska or the Dakotas or Minnesota. So it's quite rare to do that. So it's mostly going to put rain down on folks that, to be honest, have had quite a bit of it so far this growing season. And in the last week or so have not seen anything close to extreme temperatures. So that's usually what those tropical systems will do. And so we're going to watch the Gulf of Mexico very, very carefully, especially around mid-month. I do see some indications that maybe the third week of August, there might be something coming out of the Gulf that we're going to have to pay close attention to.
I noticed in your morning update for Thursday as well, you were talking about some of the wildfires and the smoke. And I know that this is something I've heard from a few producers that maybe they've, seen some of the smoke cover, keep some of the heat out during the day across parts of the country and maybe help out their crops a little bit. Is that something that you've heard as well, or maybe have seen when you're looking at things with all the wildfire smoke we've seen recently?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the reason why it's a great question is there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of what people think it does. But to be honest, I cannot find a peer-reviewed publication that tells me solidly what all that smoke does to crops during certain times of the year. What we tend to get out of it's a lot more diffuse sunlight. So it has to go through all the particulate matter, and therefore it looks more hazy. It reduces, therefore, total insolation. It's SOL, insolation, which is how much sunlight gets to the ground. And it also affects the upper atmosphere temperature, because you put all that smoke up there, it tends to kind of better absorb the heat up high. But that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't get hot down at the surface. But we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to not get that nice pure sunshine on a crop that's in its reproductive stages? And certainly as we go through this month of August for soybeans, I have a question about what that could do as well. So I monitor it. I keep an eye on what it looks like, and the effects seem to be more subtle than I can tease out. So for example, all the cool weather we just had in the eastern half of the Corn Belt, that had nothing to do with the smoke. That had everything to do with the jet stream pattern. Then the heat that's coming back on now is coming back with the smoke in the air too. So I can't pull out that relationship, and I'm waiting on somebody at some university to do some great research on it so we can actually put together a more quantitative and a peer-reviewed view of what it actually means. That's a great question.
Well, Eric, as we head into the weekend again, watching a few different storylines here, short term in that 7 to 10 day forecast. Anything else you want to reiterate or mention for us that we need to keep an eye on? I know as well some of those storm chances in the Mississippi, upper Mississippi Valley. There's talk maybe some severe weather with that as well, I believe.
Yeah, we were looking at some of the indices that tell us how much severe weather to expect, and it's possible that we could have right there. So we're talking about an area that could stretch actually all the way as far south as the Panhandles, but cut through Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, having some severe storms. And I guess I'd finish with an international update. There's not much of a story coming out of Europe or Ukraine right now. They keep getting enough rain to survive. and it's only the western part of the Russian wheat belt that I see drought and hot conditions. Now, China, the Manchurian Plain, and the North China Plain have had too much rainfall during the growing season, but it's not getting talked about nearly as much as what's going on here in the U.S. And finally, we're going to have to start talking pretty soon about South America. La Ninas tend to delay the onset of the monsoon. And if that's the case, when we push the season back, that could be important for the U.S. markets to cover what would be then a delayed crop. Now, that's not set in stone, but I'm sure you and I will meet several more times before that becomes a big deal.
I definitely think we will. We'll be catching up and talking about that here in the weeks ahead, and watching, of course, everything going on around the globe with our weather situation. I know you have your daily newsletter. We'll post a link up to that. People can subscribe. Great information. I'll post that up here in the article with today's interview. And Eric, I appreciate the time as always. Thanks for the weather update. We'll talk to you soon, my friend. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien joining us here for weather update today on Market Talk.